Chapter 2 of The Silver Chair. In Chapter 1, which was called Behind the Gym, we met Jill, and also Eustace Scrubb, who was in the previous book, showed up again. And Jill was being chased by some bullies, and things weren't going well at her school. And so Eustace and Jill went up a hill behind some shrubs, and they ended up finding a doorway into Narnia. Do you remember that? And then Eustace fell off a cliff, and she looked beside her, and what she saw, so she turned and looked at the creature beside her. It was a lion, right? Remember that? Without a glance at Jill, the lion rose to its feet and gave one last blow. Then, as if satisfied with its work, it turned and stalked slowly away back into the forest. It must be a dream. It must, said Jill to herself. I'll wake up in a moment and but it wasn't. And she didn't. I do wish we'd never come to this dreadful place, said Jill. I don't believe that Scrubb knew any more about it than I do, or if he did, he had no business bringing me here without warning me what it was like. It's not my fault he fell over that cliff. If he'd left me alone, we should both be all right. Then she remembered again the scream that Scrubb had given when he fell off the cliff, and she burst into tears. Now, crying is all right in a way while it lasts, but you have to stop sooner or later, and then you still have to decide what to do. When Jill stopped crying, she found she was dreadfully thirsty. Now, she'd been lying face downward, and now she sat up. The birds had stopped singing, and there was perfect silence around her except for one small, persistent sound, which seemed to come a good distance away. She listened carefully and felt almost sure it was the sound of running water, which never sounds that good if you're super thirsty, does it? And you don't have the water with you. Jill got up and looked around herself very carefully. Okay, no sign of the lion, but there was so many trees around that she knew it might easily be quite close without her seeing it. For all she knew, there might be several lions. But her thirst was very bad now, and she plucked up her courage to go and look for that running water she could hear. She went on tiptoes, stealing cautiously from tree to tree and stopping to peer around her at every step. The woods were so still that it was not difficult to decide where the sound was coming from. And as she walked, it grew clearer every moment, and sooner than she expected, she came to an open glade and saw the stream, bright as glass, running across the turf a stone's throw away from her. How far is a stone's throw? It's as far as you could throw a stone. But although the sight of the water made her feel 10 times thirstier than before, she didn't rush forward and drink. She stood just as still as if she had been turned into stone, with her mouth wide open, staring. And she had a very good reason. Just on this side of the stream lay the lion. It lay with its head raised and its 2 forepaws out in front of it, like the lions in Trafalgar Square, if you've ever seen pictures of that, or other pictures you've probably seen of lions. She knew at once that it had seen her, for its eyes looked straight into hers for a moment, and then looked away as if it knew her quite well and didn't think much of her. Now, if I run away, it'll be after me in a moment, thought Jill, and if I go on straight, I shall run straight into its mouth. Anyway, she couldn't have moved if she had tried, and she couldn't take her eyes off it. How long this lasted, she couldn't be sure. It seemed like hours, but she was so afraid of him. And the thirst became so bad that she almost felt she wouldn't mind being eaten by the lion if only she could be sure of getting a mouthful of water first. If you're thirsty, you may drink. Those were the first words she had heard since Scrubb had spoken to her on the edge of the cliff before he fell. For a second she stared here and there, wondering who had spoken. Then the voice said again, "If you are thirsty, come and drink." And of course she remembered what Scrubb had said about animals talking in that other world, and she realized that it was the lion speaking. Anyway, she had seen its lips move this time, and the voice was not like a man's. It was deeper, wilder, and stronger. A sort of heavy, golden voice. It didn't make her any less frightened than she'd been before, but it made her frightened in rather a different way. "Are you not thirsty?" said the lion. "I'm dying of thirst," said Jill. "Then drink," said the lion. "Well, may I, would you mind going away while I do?" asked Jill. The lion answered this only by a look and a very low growl. And as Jill gazed at its motionless bulk, she realized she might as well have asked the whole mountain to move aside for her convenience. The delicious, rippling noise of the stream was driving her nearly frantic. Can you imagine being super thirsty and then you can hear delicious water trickling beside you? Will you promise," she continued, not to do anything if I do come," said Jill. "I make no promise," said the lion. Well, Jill was so thirsty now, without even noticing it, she had come a step nearer. Do you eat girls?" she said. "I have swallowed up girls and boys, women and men, king and emperors, cities and realms," said the lion. It didn't say this as if it were boasting, not as if it were sorry, nor if it was angry. It just said it. "Well, I daren't come and drink," said Jill. "Then you will die of thirst," said the lion. "Oh, dear," said Jill, coming another step nearer. "I suppose I just must go and look for another stream then." "There is no other stream," said the lion. It never occurred to Jill to disbelieve the lion. No one who'd seen his stern face could do that, and her mind suddenly made itself up. It was the worst thing, or at least hardest thing, she ever had to do, but she went forward to the stream. She knelt down and began scooping up water in her hand. It was the coldest, most refreshing water she had ever tasted. Have you ever drunk out of a mountain stream when you're out hiking in the woods? It can be so delicious if you know it's a safe stream to drink out of. You didn't need to drink much of this water, for it quenched her thirst at once. Before she had tasted it, she had been intending to make a dash away from the lion the moment she had finished, but now she realized that this would, on the whole, be the most dangerous thing of all. So she got up and stood there with her lips still wet from drinking. "Come here," said the lion. And she had to. She was almost between its front paws now, looking straight into its face, but she couldn't stand that for long, so she dropped her eyes. "Human child," said the lion, "where is the boy?" He fell over the cliff," said Jill, and added, "sir." She didn't know what else to call him, and it sounded kind of cheeky or sassy to not call him anything. "How did he come to do that, human child?" "Well, he was trying to stop me from falling, sir." "Why were you so near the edge, human child?" "I was showing off, sir." "That is a very good answer, human child. Do so no more. And now," here for the first time the lion's face became a little less stern, "now the boy is safe. I have blown him to Narnia. But your task will now be harder because of what you have done." "Please? What task, sir?" said Jill. "The task for which I called you and him here out of your own world." Well, this puzzled Jill very much, and she thought for a second about it. "It's mistaking me for someone else," she thought. She didn't dare tell the lion this, though she felt things would get into a dreadful muddle unless she explained it to him. "Speak your thoughts, human child," said the lion. "Well, see, I was wondering. I mean, well, could there be some mistake? Because nobody actually called me in Scrub. You know, it was we who asked to come here. Scrub said we were to call to somebody. It was a name I wouldn't know that name, but perhaps the somebody would let us in, and we did, and then we found the open door." "You would not have called to me unless I have been calling to you," said the lion. "Oh, then you are somebody, sir?" said Jill. "I am. And now hear your task. Far from here, In the land of Narnia there lives an aged king who is sad because he has no prince of his blood to be king after him. He has no heir because his only son was stolen from him many years ago, and no one in Narnia knows where that prince went or whether he is still alive. But he is. If I lay on you this command that you seek this lost prince until either you have found him and brought him to his father's house, or else you have died in the attempt to do so, or else gone back into your own world. How, please? Said Jill. I will tell you, child, said the lion. These are the signs by which I will guide you in your quest. First, as soon as the boy Eustace sets foot in Narnia, he will meet an old and dear friend. He must greet that friend at once. If he does, you will both have good help. Second, you must journey out of Narnia to the north until you come to the ruined city of the ancient giants. Third, you shall find a writing stone in that ruined city, and you must do what the writing tells you. And fourth, you will know the lost prince, if you find him, by this, that he will be the first person you have met in your travels who will ask you to do something in my name, in the name of Aslan. As the lion seemed to have finished talking, Jill thought she should say something, so she said, Okay, thank you very much, I see. Child, said Aslan in a gentler voice than he had yet used, perhaps you do not see quite as well as you think. But the first step is to remember these 4 steps. Repeat to me in order the 4 signs. So Jill tried about the Eustace meeting someone and talking to him, and going north to the city of the ruined giants, and finding a stone in that city with writing on it, and talking to the lost prince, and he will ask them to do something in Aslan's name. And she kind of got them right, but the lion corrected her and made her repeat them again and again and again until she could say them perfectly. He was very patient over this, so that when it was done, Jill plucked up courage to ask, Please, sir, how am I to get to Narnia? How am I to get to Narnia? On my breath, said the lion. I will blow you into the west of the world as I blew Eustace. Well, shall I catch him in time to tell him the first sign? But, well, I suppose it won't matter. If he sees an old friend, he's sure to go and speak to him, isn't he? You will have no time to spare, said the lion. That is why I must send you at once. Come, walk before me to the edge of the cliff. Well, Jill remembered very well that if there was no time to spare, that was her own fault. If I hadn't made such a fool of myself, Scrub and I would have been going together, and he'd have heard all the instructions just as well as me, she thought. So she did as she was told. It was very alarming to walking back to the cliff, especially as the lion didn't walk with her, but he walked behind her, making no noise as he walked behind her with his soft paws. But long before she had gotten anywhere near the edge, the voice behind her said, Stand still. In a moment I will blow, but first, remember, remember, remember the 4 signs. Say them to yourself when you wake up in the morning, and when you lie down at night, and you wake up in the middle of the night. And whatever strange things may happen to you, let nothing turn your mind from following the signs. And secondly, I give you a warning. Here on the mountains I have spoken to you clearly. I will not often do so down in Narnia. Here on the mountain the air is clear, and your mind is clear. As you drop down into Narnia, the air will thicken. Take great care that it does not confuse your mind. And the signs which you have learned here will not look at all as you expect them to look when you meet them there. That is why it is so important to know them by heart and pay no attention to appearances. Remember the signs and believe the signs. Nothing else matters. And now, daughter of Eve, farewell. Now the voice had been growing softer towards the end of this speech, and now it faded away altogether. Jill glanced behind her. To her astonishment, she saw that the cliff was already more than 100 yards behind her, and the lion himself was just a speck of bright gold on the edge of it. She had been setting her teeth and clenching her fists for a terrible blast of lion's breath, but the breath had really been so gentle that she had not even noticed the moment at which she left the earth. And now there was nothing but air for thousands upon thousands of feet below her. She felt frightened only for a second. For one thing, the world beneath her was so very far away that it kind of seemed to have nothing to do with her. And for another, floating on the breath of the lion was so extremely comfortable. She found she could lie on her back or on her face, and she could twist any way she pleased, just as you can in water, I guess, if you've learned to float really, really well, that is. And because she was moving at the same pace as the breath, there was no wind, none at all. And the air seemed beautifully warm. It was not in the least like being in an airplane because, well, there was no noise, no vibration. If Jill had been in a balloon, a hot air balloon, she might have thought it was more like that, but only better. When she looked back now, she could see, taken for the first time, the real size of the mountain she was leaving. She wondered why a mountain so huge as that was not covered with snow and ice like they are in our world. But I suppose all that sort of thing is different in this world, thought Jill. Then she looked below her, but she was so high that she couldn't make out whether she was floating over land or sea, nor what speed she was going at. Oh, by Jove, the signs, said Jill suddenly. I'd better repeat them. She was in a panic for a second or two, but she found she could still say them all correctly, all four of them. So that's all right, she said, and lay back on the air as if it was a couch. And she sighed a sigh of contentment. Well, I do declare, said Jill to herself some hours later, I've been sleeping. Fancy sleeping on air. I wonder if anyone's done that before. Although I don't suppose they have, but oh bother, Scrub probably has. On this same journey, a little bit before me. Let's see now what it looks like down below. Well, what it looked like was an enormous, very dark blue plain. There were no hills to be seen, but there were biggish white things moving slowly across it. Oh, those must be clouds, she thought, but they're far bigger than the ones we saw from the cliff. I suppose they're bigger because they're nearer. I must be getting lower, closer down. Bother the sun. The sun, which had been high overhead when she began her journey, was now getting into her eyes. This meant that it was getting lower, ahead of her. Scrub was quite right in saying that. Jill, I don't know about girls in general, but Jill didn't think much about the points of the compass, east, northwest, and south. Otherwise, she would have known that when the sun began getting in her eyes, that she was traveling pretty well due west. West is where the sun sets. East is where the sun comes up. Staring at the blue plain below her, she presently noticed that there were little dots of brighter, paler color in it here and there. Oh, that's the sea, thought Jill. I do believe those are islands. And so they were. She might have felt a little bit jealous if she had known that some of those were islands which Scrub had seen from a ship's deck and even landed on those islands, but she didn't know these things. Remember that from the book about the Dawn Treader, the ship? Then later on, she began to see that there were little wrinkles on the blue flatness, little wrinkles which must have been quite big ocean waves if you were down among them. And now, all along the horizon, there was a thick, dark line which was growing thicker and darker so quickly that you could see it growing. That was the first sign she had of the great speed at which she was traveling, and she knew that the thickening line must be land. Suddenly, from her left, for the wind was in the south, a great white cloud came rushing towards her. This time it was on the same level as herself, and before she knew where she was, she had shot right into the middle of this cold, wet, foggy cloud. It took her breath away, but she was in it only for a moment, and then she came out blinking in the sunlight and found her clothes were kind of wet. She had on a blazer and sweater and shorts and stockings and pretty thick shoes. It had been sort of a muddy kind of a day in England when she left. She came out lower down even than she had gone in, and as soon as she did so, she noticed something which I suppose she ought to have been expecting, but which came as a surprise and a shock. It was noises. Up till then, she'd traveled in total silence. Now, for the first time, she heard the noise of waves, and though there's some seagulls, she could hear the crying of seagulls, and now, too, she smelled the smell of the sea, the salty smell. There was no mistake about her speed now. She saw two waves meet with a smack and a spout of foam go up between them, but she'd hardly seen it before it was 100 yards behind her. The land was getting nearer at a great speed. She could see mountains far inland and other nearer mountains on her left. She could see bays and headlands, woods and fields, stretches of sandy beach. The sound of waves breaking on the shore was growing louder every second and drowning out the other sea noises. Suddenly the land opened up right ahead of her. She was coming to the mouth of a river. She was very low now, only just a few feet above the water. A wave top came against her toe and a great splash of foam spurted up, drenching her nearly up to the waist. Now she was losing speed. Instead of being carried up the river, she was gliding into the riverbank on her left. There were so many things to notice that she could hardly take them all in. A smooth green lawn, a ship so brightly colored that it looked like an enormous piece of jewelry, towers and battlements, banners flowing in the air, a crowd, cheerful, bright clothes, armor, gold, swords, a sound of music. But this was all jumbled. The first thing that she knew clearly was that she had landed and was standing under a thicket of trees close by the river. And there, only a few feet away from her, was Scrub. The first thing she thought was how very grubby and untidy and generally unimpressive he looked. And the second thought she had was, how wet am I? And that's the end of that chapter called Jill is Given a Task. Okay, you're going to come back for chapter 3. It's called The Sailing of the King. Okay, make sure you come back ready to hear another chapter.